Hello, and back from a reasonably long hiatus, 3 months or so. So it's Zan and I again to talk about
Hello, everyone.
Dazar'alor. There's Zan. Feels good, man. Obviously, our last one we talked about the 8.1 PTR changes, and we said we were going to come back when they had made more changes so we could discuss more on what we thought of that, but then they didn't make any other changes. Um, so that's that. I'm sure everyone's used to like what 8.1 is now, so we can talk about that a bit later. But for now, we might as well jump into Battle for Dazar'alor, which is obviously releasing next week. Um, it'll be our first raid with new 8.1 changes. So we might as well start talking about traits, I guess.
Yes.
There's 3 new traits. I have been unprepared and I haven't gotten up what the new traits are, but there are 3 new traits.
Yeah, you're talking about the generics, I suppose.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
generics.
So the generic, the only one that is you need to know is the one called Treacherous Covenant. The
Yes.
other two, one is Bonded Soul, and I don't remember the name of the third one, but those both of those are garbage. So it's not interesting anymore.
Well, there's some
But
talk to have about it, I guess, in that odds are they're probably going to be buffed.
yeah, so the one I don't remember the name of
Right, so
is
I've got them here now. So there's Bonded
yeah,
Souls, which your spells and abilities have a chance to trigger a Soulbound for 15 seconds. During Soulbound, every 5 seconds, you and your nearest ally are both healed for 8,769 and gain haste for 5 seconds. Cool.
yeah.
That's going to be
So
undertuned because
that
it
one
gives 2
could.
people.
Yeah, but that one could potentially be good, right? Like in theory, of course, haste isn't bad. So obviously, if it's tuned at a certain point, it could be good. But it's completely passive, so it's like, oh, you get more
Yeah,
stats and
whatever.
buff and it's whatever. It's
Spells
just a
abilities have a chance to conjure one somebody's spectral visage beckoning you closer. If you approach him, gain 66 to all stats for 5 minutes, stacking up to 5 times. If you fail to heed his call, lose 1 stack. Seductive power.
yeah.
That's going to be shit to play around if that's buffed.
It's extremely bad. So how it works at the moment, at least, unless it changes, um, it has it procs roughly once every minute. Like it has a RPPM of 1. That's a pretty low RPPM, but also it stacks to 5, I think.
Yep.
Which means that it doesn't reach its full power before 5 minutes into a fight. Like that's the average number, obviously. Like it's slightly faster than that, and that's assuming you never fail, because every time you fail, you reset one stack, right? So the combination of this makes this trait extremely unlikely to be good ever. It would basically have to be tuned in a way where one stack is, or 1 or 2 stacks are competitive with another trait, which would make it
Yeah.
obscenely overpowered.
Overpowered at 5.
So yeah, so that's extremely unlikely to happen, which is why I'm saying this one is probably never going to be good at all. Just that's my assumption, at least.
Yeah, that seems pretty likely. That's an AIDS mechanic. Wow.
Yeah, and there's no, as far as I know, you can't track the ghost spawning either with any good way. Like it will just be a visual thing that will spawn somewhere around you that you have to run toward. It's really annoying. Like I really
Yeah, I'm
can't
just
stress how
thinking
bad
like
this is.
all the mechanics that are just going to completely screw. Like, can you imagine if it spawns during Zekvor's rings, that kind of thing,
Yeah, exactly.
and you have to run it, and you just completely lose? Yeah,
There's plenty of fights where you
yeah,
just can't
exactly.
move.
Where you can't run towards a certain area, or if it spawns in something like that's okay. So I think I can be reasonably confident that shit ain't gonna get used unless they buff the shit out of it.
It is also undertuned. So,
Yeah,
but like
I mean
I mean that could
66 full
that
stats
could
for 5 minutes.
yeah, exactly. That
Yeah,
could change, obviously, but it's the way I see it, it's extremely unlikely with how the mechanics works. So the
cool.
bonded soul one is probably always going to be undertuned for the reason you said,
Yeah,
the fact that it
exactly. You
affects
get
two
two
people.
people.
Uh, so that's a thing. Like maybe that could be good. I don't think it will be, but potentially could
I
be good.
mean, there's always the chance that you RNG onto someone who's like a healer, and then the haste is essentially worthless DPS wise, at least.
Oh yeah,
Um,
and some people haste is just flat bad for
yeah,
anyway.
good old monks. So I guess that
Yeah.
leaves the only other one, which is Treacherous Covenant. There's actually a decent amount to talk about for Treacherous Covenant.
Oh yeah.
So obviously, your primary stat is increased by X amount while you're above 50% health. You take 15% increased damage while below 20% health. So there's like, it's a shit ton of stats, but there's 2 potential downsides there.
Yeah. So this one is overtuned, arguably. And when I say overtuned, I mean it's probably worse than Young Fury, even in theory. But it is overtuned compared to what a general trait usually is. And assuming you can keep it up 100% of the time, that means you are above 50% health 100% of the time. This is probably the best general trait. Certainly a very, very competitive trait for almost everyone. That's my guess, at least, at these numbers.
Yeah.
However, yeah, you don't need it to drop below 50% health a lot for this uptime to be considerably which is a massive drawback, I think, at least in certain progress fights, particularly
It's
one.
definitely gonna be fight dependent.
Yeah, very.
Like,
Particularly, and plus as well, like it's fairly common that you can drop below 50% for a while. Like, and that's just immediate. You go from full effect to zero. It's not as bad as, for example, Cradle of Anguish or something like that,
yeah,
which would drop stacks as well. So it had a ramp up, but it is still pretty. It's worse than simulation, say, in practice, just for that reason alone, which is worth keeping in mind.
yeah. I don't think the second disadvantage will too frequently be encountered, or at least
No.
a problem, because generally, if you're below 20% health and you're taking damage, odds are you're fucking dead anyway. Obviously, there's times like Goon Part 3, or
I
like
think Goon is the biggest exception to that, where I think,
Mithrax potentially, stuff
yeah,
like
like
that.
there's certainly cases where that drawback would matter. Like, it's pretty easy to
Yeah,
imagine a specific case where that would matter, but I agree that I don't think it's a lot of people that really hate this talent look at that specific drawback and says, sorry, trait, not
trait.
talent. Yeah, and they say, oh, it's gonna kill you, like, or whatever, and it will probably, but not often. I think that drawback isn't that significant. But like I said, I think the drawback
Yeah,
of it's actually not 100% uptime fights is a significant drawback. So, yeah, it's hard to say how good it's going to be in practice. I think for farm, there's very much an argument that this might be a fine choice, maybe even a good choice, in general,
I mean, I
because
think it'll probably end up being used quite a lot just because it's on so much of the gear.
yeah, yeah. Although I would say because it's good for basically everyone, it is probably going to be very those
Contested.
gear pieces are going to be very contested. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. And obviously we mentioned Jungle Fury. I'm sure everyone knows by now that that's pretty solid. But actually, you can get quite a lot of it in the raid, can't you?
Oh yeah, you can
You can
get a
get three
full.
pieces, can't you?
Yeah, you can.
I have
Uh,
noted down.
uh,
What is it? Cal of Righteous Resolve, Mestra's Singeing Spolders, and Mechatork's Bomber Jacket. If I
I
remember
actually
correctly.
think there's one. Yeah, those definitely. I think there might even be one more, but there are anyway a lot of them, and it's a very good trait to stack. Like, it's basically never bad, uh,
Yeah, I mean that's
which
it.
is a big. Like, it's good in every situation. Like, it's at worst good, right, and at best it's very good because it synchronizes very well with a lot of crit mechanics, and obviously everyone that has been simulating the characters since 8.1 crit is very good, especially with Solo to Forest, of course.
Yes, obviously Soul of the Forest and crit means you get a shit ton of energy, and we quite like energy.
And this also means if you have two or three of, well, we're talking about the eye levels here are basically starting at 380. That's normal, I think, for battle.
Yeah,
So that means you will, with two or three, probably crit cap inside Incarnation as well,
I,
which, you know, Incarnation hasn't been used a lot, but it isn't as bad as people think as well. So it's not completely
I remember looking.
impossible that it might be fine.
It's something like double the value of Berserk. So if there's like a significant burst damage fight, then there's decent odds that we can find a use for Incarnation.
Yeah, exactly. The biggest issue it has is that it is weaker, right? And so, like, quite noticeably weaker than Soul of the. It's not as bad as Sabertooth, but versus Li, but it is still pretty. It is like 3-4%, that kind of range. And while burst is better than sustained damage, it is not significantly better most of the time. So that's a thing to keep in mind.
Again, obviously, people are gonna have to remember that we're no longer in Uldir. Like Uldir significantly pushed burst.
Yeah,
Like Uldir really blasted burst, but there seems like there's a lot fewer um, burst amplification, should we say, in
yeah.
Battle of Dazar'alor, which was the significant thing.
Now, like, all of this could change with balance, but
Oh, of
yeah.
course, yeah. Man, this I'm just looking at these. There's a lot of really good Boomkin pieces here.
Yeah. Like in general, I think the gear is pretty good. Like
It's
there's a
nice
lot of good
how much
pieces.
Azurite there is.
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 slots or pieces for each slot, and that's pretty good. And in fact, most of those pieces, there's like one quote unquote bad in each slot. I think that's basically it. So like everything else is reasonable. Like even if you can't get Young of Fury ×3, for example, you can get a chest that has like gushing and wild flesh rending.
Yeah, which
And
seems.
which is good. Like that's good.
Yeah,
Like it's just flat out. It's like a percent worse maybe or something like that. But it obviously that's perfectly reasonable.
man, both shoulders have Jungle Fury.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's 5 pieces with Jungle Fury on it. 2 helmets. Chest is the only one where there's only one, and I'm sure we'll live with that. Obviously, we've still got to talk about what am I thinking of, Sam?
I'm not sure.
Residuum. That's the one.
Oh, Titanic. Yes.
Yeah. Obviously, you're going to get at least one piece from Residuum.
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly which slot is best to gamble, but obviously in practice it would be whichever slot you haven't gotten from the raid, right? So
Yeah.
it's probably wrong to buy unless you're extremely polygeared, obviously. It's probably a bad idea to immediately gamble in season 2. You probably want to wait at least a week or 2 weeks, depending
I
on
think
how.
you want to wait until Mythic Week after you've done your second heroic clear
Yeah, so
with your strats.
if you're min maxing for mythic progression, I should clarify obviously that if you are not a mythic raider, then this min maxing
A
doesn't
lot of what we're
matter
talking
at
about
all.
isn't relevant.
Yeah, but if you're a mythic raider, so realistically you're gonna do heroic, you're gonna see what you get. And then you are probably waiting as well for. I would at least probably wait for the early mythic bosses. If there's anything easy where it doesn't really matter what gear you have, it might be worth waiting and hope you can get one. Because even some of the early bosses have really good SRF pieces for it. And especially with coins, it's a pretty reasonable chance that you end up getting an SRF from a very early mythic boss. And obviously, then if you can get, for example, 2 slots filled with raid right, then yeah, it's a good idea to gamble for the first.
Yeah, exactly. What am I looking at?
Because
Gushing Lacerations.
almost all our trades are good. It's worth keeping in mind. Like even the worst case for Fair right now isn't that bad.
Oh god, yeah. What would you consider worst case? Actually, I'm
So
thinking.
the worst
I'm
case
thinking
would,
worst case I'd consider would be Twisted Claws or Masterful Instincts.
yeah, but those are Guardian trades. So that's fine.
Yeah, fair. So there'll be.
The
Yeah,
worst
so there'll
case
be a
would
Fair
be
one on there as well.
the worst case would be you definitely have one Iron Yaws, but you don't have enough Iron Yaws stacked to make it good. And like Untamed Fury or something,
Yeah,
it's not.
I think one Untamed Fury might actually be decent.
Yeah, it's not horrible.
Yeah.
So 1 point, but obviously 1 point. Yeah. And
So
also, you needed the generator build. Like point is, it's pretty unlikely that you manage to. I'm sure there is like 1 or 2. You can
yeah,
if you go through all that, right? You can probably find a piece that's hard, but it's pretty hard to find a really, really bad asteroid piece. So that's a good.
yeah. Just aside, looking at these points, I think if you're going to pick a slot to gamble on, just based on um, like irregardless of what you get, so just to like pick a piece to gamble on, they're going to pick chest.
Yeah, I would also agree with that. That's
There's three Jungle Fury chests, and it's like Jungle Fury Wild Flesh Rending, Jungle Fury Gushing Lacerations, Jungle Fury Wild Flesh Rending.
and I also think it's the slot which is weakest in the raid.
Yeah, what's the raid chest? Yes, because there's only one Jungle Fury chest in the raid, which is the Mecha Talk one, which, if I remember correctly,
Yeah,
is actually fairly late in the raid. Though I think it depends whether you're a Horde or Alliance.
yeah, I'm
Um,
not sure about that, but
yeah,
certainly
and even that's not great. I mean, it's Jungle Fury, Blood Mist, which yeah,
Younger Fury Blood Mist isn't bad, obviously.
it's not bad. Well, Jungle
Like
Fury Treacherous or Jungle Fury Blood Mist. But compared to like I don't know Jungle Fury Gushing Lacerations, I think Gushing Lacerations is such a solid 1 pointer that being able to pick it up is highly in demand.
Yeah, I guess we should discuss this a bit more because I've heard a lot of different opinions about what is good and what is not good as far as trait setup. It's important to note every single trait setup is not actually possible to get because there is actually not that many pieces. There's like 6 M plus pieces, I think,
Yeah, something like
and
that.
then there's 3 raid pieces, right? So those are really your up. There's lower eye level stuff, of course, but if you're trying to min max at like a relatively high eye level for 15, uh, there isn't that. You have a lot of choices, but it's not quite unlimited. Um, Iron Yaws, for example, and especially if you've been on a sim site like Hero Damage, Blood Mallet.
Yeah, we should especially talk about Iron Jaws actually.
Yeah, it looks really good when you have 3, and it is like it's really quite bad with 1. Actually, it's outrageously bad. You really don't want 1. It's sort of okay, but not great at 2, and it is looking really good at 3. Now the problem is, even if that's true, the the trait is only really good at patchwork. It falls off quite hard on anything not patchwork, which actually
Because you
is
start spending
most
your
encountered.
combo points less on Ferocious Bite and more on Primal Wrath or something like that.
Yeah, and while you can have multiple gear sets, it's quite. If you're actually aiming for Iron Yaws, you need multiple gear sets, which means that is a bad strategy.
It's loot taken away from someone else. Like you could just go
Yeah,
for a different
yeah,
trait
exactly.
and be in a better
It's a
position.
load taken away, and it means that you are potentially hurting yourself on anything not single target, and so that's
There's
a
very
pretty
few
big
fights
drop.
that are pure single target as well, which is something to
And,
consider.
and you probably want to do M plus at least some amount,
Yeah,
so that's also relevant. Um,
like odds are you'll run into. There'll probably be like one fight where Iron Jaws ends up really solid. Like I wouldn't be surprised if
oh
there was
yeah, no,
one
no,
fight
no.
that was
I'm
primarily single target. And it's. I think we can mention the fact that Iron Jaws might actually end up being really solid if there's like a really big priority thing that you can hold a Iron Jaws proc for,
Yeah.
potentially.
Although, yeah, although I would say it's harder.
It's kind of
Yes,
hard
you
to
can.
hold it, yeah.
It's. I actually think Irenos isn't nearly as bad as people used to think. Like I ran it already last year before 8.1.
Yeah, I remember you
Uh,
getting huge main crits and just spiking up to DPS
yeah,
meters.
it was actually quite good. But the difference between Irenos back then and now is that back then 1 point or 2 point was fine and that was good. Now it's the reverse basically. Like now you need to commit very hard for it, and I think it's a bad strategy to aim for. Like potentially you end up when, oh, I just got these pieces because it's random. Like everything is random about that, right? So you could just end up with, oh yeah, I was lucky or whatever, unlucky, and I got 3 iron ores. Like that's fine in that case. Yeah, it's probably a good choice, and you should stimulate this obviously. But I don't think you should aim for those pieces. Like you shouldn't tell someone to trade you an or a piece because it has iron ores. Like I don't think that's a good idea. I think you should really aim for Jungle Fury. Like the
Yes,
theoretical best setup is Jungle Fury times 3, right? So that's
Jungle
worth
Fury is
keeping in
just
mind.
so good in all content.
It's not much better. It's basically similar to Iron Yours, but the best setup theoretically is actually an Iron Yours setup. So yeah, that's worth keeping. Or sorry, Jungle Fury. Got that.
Yeah, no, crit is just universally good.
Yeah, and you're
Yeah,
always gonna use Tiger's Fury. So
yeah. That said, regarding Jungle Fury, and this might be a bit of a jump back, but I can't wait to have to answer questions about what the crit cap is with 3 Jungle Fury.
yeah, you probably can't reach it yet, but it's like
We're
next
not
year or
far
something.
off. Like 3
Yeah,
Jungle Fury, you're around like 70% or so.
yeah, easily.
Yeah, potentially. Um,
There's such a cutoff point. There already
it is gonna be relevant. Yeah, entirely.
there is already a cutoff point where it diminishes in value. It's not as brutal as it would have been with stupid re-origination,
Oh
but
Jesus Christ! Can you
yeah,
imagine?
like where haste sims extremely poorly because if you add the way stat weights work, I should explain this, and this is why you can have very big fluctuations with small gear changes. Is basically you run a sim, and then you run a sim where you add some amount of stat of a specific stat to the sim, and then you look at the DPS difference between the and you divide that with how much you added, and that gives the number. So this is that means, for example, with stuff like the re-origination, adding, say, 250 stat or 300 stat or something changes what is your biggest stat, and suddenly it has a massive swing between these two just because.
That's why haste jumping from like top to the bottom and various ridiculous things.
Yeah, it's very common that, particularly with haste, because we have so much haste gear from 8.0, that you would see a lot of cases where, like, oh yeah, adding a small amount of haste would make it bigger than crit or mastery, and suddenly the reorigination array would move 750.
This is partly why haste trinkets like died a horrible death after 8.1, just because like
Yeah,
popping a gale callers and suddenly having real origination haste was like a
yeah.
far bigger loss than just haste being slightly worse.
And if you have played with any of those setups since, which I have, for example, you really notice it in game as well, because you
Yes.
suddenly, instead of getting like 1,000 haste, you get like almost 2,000. It's like a massive radiant increase. It's very, very noticeable.
Yeah.
And that's gonna go away. Is where I'm gonna come with this. So in 8.1, when you drop the reorigination array, you're gonna see how haste, crit, mastery are all basically the top three stats, and the order is gonna be depend a little bit on your talents, but mostly it's just gonna be swap around depending on your gear.
I do think if you've got a lot of jungle fury, then easily the most stackable stat is mastery.
Yeah, it is. Mastery is probably gonna be the best stat, like generically,
It's just yeah,
especially with Sabertooth. Yeah, especially with
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Sabertooth,
yeah. It
which
brings
is
just brings you a lot more
likely the
than crit, I think, in terms
yeah
of value.
yeah because mastery doesn't have any real drawback anymore. It used to have a drawback, which was it didn't affect all
Direct
of your
damage
single
and
attacks
ferocious
now.
bite.
But now when shred and yeah, mostly shred and to be fair, even rake to some degree is very low as part of the aura damage, and you don't have li as well. That means that like 50-60% of your damage is in a finisher. This is all mastery. And if you go to AoE, especially if you're primal rough, suddenly that's all bleed damage anyway, so it's already also affected by this.
And crit's falling off a bit at this degree because you're already critting so much with shred, not shred, swipe, that other button, and
Yeah,
gaining
so
combo points from gushing lacerations. That the kind of part of the value of crit falls off there as well. But yeah, I think mastery is going to be where it's at. Um,
yeah, definitely the best stuff that I
yeah,
think
so
is
obviously
definitely.
gushing lacerations, which we can mention. Obviously, everyone knows what that does. Gives you a combo point on rip. Um, there's not
And
going to be
that's
any real change, yeah, in the
no,
value of that.
it's just good. Like
Yeah,
1 point is always quite good on that, but like Young Fury is just overpowered now, and you can have both. It's just very good to have these 1 pointers for extra like small bonus. It's just the best setup, I think. In theory, is probably like one gushing laceration, one blood mist, and one untamed
untamed
ferocity,
ferocity, and then
plus
three
3 Young
jungle
Fury.
fury. Yeah,
Yeah. You can substitute with wild flesh rending. It's like always reasonable, never amazing. Similar with stuff like Treasure's Covenant or Blightborn Infusion or those kind of traits are just solid.
yeah. Obviously,
Uh,
wild flesh running did lose a bit of value, but it's still
yeah, I mean it's
pretty
worse,
good.
but
I
it's
mean,
fine. Like it's not
and it
bad.
obviously remains reasonably valuable on AOE because
Yeah, it's perfectly
where
stackable.
you're
So which is,
casting Thrash already. Yeah, I
I
think
guess
I
it's
would
worth
one.
saying with gushing and blood mist, both of those are actually pretty good AOE traits as well. Because so gushing, the damage it gives to Rip actually stacks really well with Primavera for obvious reasons. So in actual AoE or in Platinus, the trait itself is a lot better. It's not like, oh, it's much better. You want 3x. That no, but like 2x or something with like a bunch of
Isn't
younger
a
fury relics.
disaster.
That's a pretty good setup. Like I think the optimal setup might even have two gushing lacerations, certainly from a raid game, because the chest is pretty weak. Yeah,
Yeah. Yep. No, obviously everyone knows Primal Wrath does
and
a
and
metric shit ton of damage.
and also it's worth saying also, I guess, because a lot of these traits used to be much worse than they like Blood Mist, for example, which is the rake damage and can proc Berserk. That trait used to be pretty bad, and it still isn't amazing, but it is pretty good as a 1 and 2 pointer. Uh, like Berserk is a lot better now when we actually use all the energy to wit
Yes,
essentially.
obviously the problem with Berserk before was that we couldn't convert the energy we gained into direct damage significantly.
Yeah,
But now with like the value of Ferocious Bite, that damage converts a lot better. it's actually
So it's a lot
yeah.
better of a trait, especially as a one pointer. But even if you have 2 pointers, like rake damage isn't bad. It was buffed at some point as well, so it's a much better trait than it was.
And then obviously Untamed Ferocity, which was the changed one, and that's just all your combo point generating abilities.
Imagine how good that raking ferocity would have been if it hadn't changed. Like, ooh.
Don't even. Can you imagine? 3
Mm-hmm.
Jungle Fury, 3 Raking Ferocity. Woo,
Yeah,
lad. Mastery
that one is
adjustments.
that one. The new one as well is good in M plus, particularly. Like you can really use the energy efficiently in M plus. You're burning everything on Primal Wrath. Uh,
Yeah,
like essentially, you are just completely energy gated in M plus when there's AOE because you can always just dump with Primal Wrath.
Primal Wrath, yeah. And that
So
converts
yeah,
so solidly. If I don't know, I assume anyone watching this has probably looked at the pins and hashtag Feral, but the spreadsheet there gives a really good picture of just how obscenely energy efficient Primal Wrath is, just
yeah,
compared to anything we've had historically.
it is
It's just
actually insane.
ludicrous.
Yeah, it's
Mm.
really, really, really strong. Obviously, it doesn't do anything on single target, which is the drawback. Always is the drawback with picking it. But it is very, very, very strong on AoE. Even like a small number of targets, like 2 or 3, it's extreme. So.
Yeah, well, it's better than Ferocious Bite at like 3 to 4,
Oh yeah,
which
no,
is
it is arguably, yeah, it's probably even lower. Like even a 2, it's very, very tight between the two. And like 3, it's almost always better. So that, yeah, it's an insanely good talent.
yeah. Um, da-da-da. I guess we can talk somewhat about 2 of the bosses that we thought might be pretty solid for Feral. So we've got Conclave of the Chosen, which we mentioned before this, which is a 2-target cleave, and you have to keep them 8 yards away from each other. So similar to Coven, except 2 targets. Um, obviously, we've historically been one of the melees that exceeds the best at cleave, because the only, or especially spread cleave like this, because
Yeah.
multi-dotting. And that 8 yards away will sort of, that'll ruin the warriors and the demon hunters and the various other things from cleaving onto them. But
Well, I don't know about demon hunters. They'll find a way with their eye beams.
yeah, they'll get eye beam. I don't know if they'll get what is it, death sweep
Hmm.
and blade dance. Yeah, I don't know if they'll be able to get that. But obviously that looks pretty strong for us. We quite like cleave. We're pretty okay with them being a bit apart. That looks decent for us. And then obviously Jadefire Masters was the same reason. It's just a 2-target cleave fight, and we quite like cleave.
Yeah.
I know I've been saying to quite a lot of people that my personal hot take is that Feral is going to be the best non-buff melee, and then melee won't be very good in general. But I think I'll stand by that.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Obviously, slightly biased, both of us, but I do think that's
I don't know what you're
that's a
talking about.
very reasonable perspective. Honestly, like I think already in Aldair, Feral is undervalued. Uh, After the hotfix buff, especially, I think I feel very, very reasonable most fights. Like, yes, not amazing necessarily. I don't think we're overpowered, for example. But I mean, I think we feel very, very reasonable.
Yeah, uh, outside of Sabretooth and the gameplay that prompts, I do think this is one of the potentially better iterations of Feral.
Yeah,
It's certainly the best iteration for AoE or Cleave that we've played.
yeah. I mean, it is for sure.
That's not really a contest because the last good iteration, damage-wise, was
Well, on Taurus,
Antorus,
yeah.
and that was god awful to play. I really like spamming Thrash and Shadow Thrash.
Yeah, I do feel like the finisher. I was obviously very suspicious of a finish, AoE finish.
Yeah, we've talked about it in the past, haven't we? I can't
Yeah,
remember which
I don't
episode.
remember if it was public in like cat chat or just in
I
Discord.
think we've definitely mentioned it in a cat chat. I'll talk
Yeah,
about AoE finishes.
but very suspicious about the AoE finish. Still am to some degree. I don't really like. To me, it's so unbelievable that Primavera is tuned like
The
this,
way
where
it
it's
is.
actually really overpowered as far as a single ability goes, in my opinion. But with that, yeah, it's fine. So I'll say that it feels great to play, and I do hope they don't change it because if it's really good in M plus, in my opinion,
Yeah, I agree. Um, I've actually quite enjoyed M+. The few I've managed to play as feral and not been scammed into tanking.
Yeah, or heal.
Or healing, yep, those are the two. Um, do we want to take a moment to talk about Switch Hitter? Sorry, I just remembered this trait.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
you had some fun with it on Goon, didn't you?
It's really fucking awful. Like so the idea behind it is if you use an ability from your affinity, you get some kind of extra bonus. This is a utility trait. It's not a massive
Yeah,
deal.
so we're talking like on the same range as Osok's Endurance and Azerite Fortification, Gem Hide and Bulwark and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I would argue the best one there is probably Reawakening. But this one is not. So basically, it has three benefits. You can't get the Pharaoh benefit. So you can get Leech from casting Star Surge, which is horrendous. Like that's a massive. Like if you're running Balance Affinity, like it's not that Leech would be bad. Like it would be really good, but the cost of swapping to Balance, which you can only do
Casting a
once
Star
every 90
Surge.
seconds, by the way. So it's not even like you can do this if you want to be defensive or anything. You can only do it once. And then you have to swap back and you have to do some damage in cat form for like I don't know, like
20
3% for.
seconds you get it for.
Yeah, I mean that's the reasonable duration, but it's like what is this? And then the
Garbage
other two,
gameplay.
yeah, it's really bad. Like I don't understand the thought pattern there at all. Like we'll never use that. And I mean the worst part is these class traits. Like I don't know how they think Guardians are ever gonna use. Yeah, whatever. I don't know if anyone actually thought this through properly. Like, it's not that the idea behind off specking is bad, or like the sub specs or whatever you want to call them.
Affinities,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, but this implementation, I don't know. But that the other two options are you get an absorb shield when you swift. So this is
That's the least
probably
bad one, but again,
yeah,
usually
it's very
Swiftmend
useful.
after damage.
Yeah, I mean this is usable. Like it's not bad. Like whatever. If this is the one you're realistically gonna use if you have switch it, so
Yeah.
sure. I mean, this is what I did. It like did like a minuscule amount of my healing and going, but whatever.
17k, wasn't it?
Yeah, 17k.
Compared to like
I don't remember, but million,
200,
literally
yeah,
million
2 million something of your, what was
wild
it,
growth for
resounding
it.
protection.
Yeah, it was really
Yeah.
really bad.
Um,
Um,
yeah, I don't know if anyone's had a strong look at this. Obviously, Frenzied Regen and Swiftmend share the same problem where you use them after damage and the traits that they give or the bonuses they give you help you reduce damage. That's like usable but not ideal. Frenzied Regeneration, obviously, potentially you could use that before a big hit. 412 avoidance. Yeah, that's a decent amount of avoidance.
it's very reasonable, but again, it's very rare that you want Guardian
Yeah,
Affinity to protect you anyway, because Rest probably just does it better unless you one shot, literally one shot, you just heal up. And you have instincts anyway, so even if you would get literally one shot with bear
yeah.
form and
You have to take a shit ton of damage to be one shot, and at that point, I mean, when this would be relevant is probably M plus.
yeah,
Um, and at the point whereby you're going to be one shot through bare form survival instincts, um, you're probably fucking dead. Everyone's dead as shit anyway. So, and
yeah.
at that point, I think
Let's say
Ursok's
this:
endurance just does that trait better.
you are probably not the first person to die in this scenario, right? If this is like a random AoE that hits everyone for like 400k, you are probably not the first person to die in your group. Like, let's just
No.
say that. So, yeah,
So yeah, that seems pretty questionable. But it's a new trait,
avoid it
so
is my point.
yeah.
Just avoid it. Like, pick anything else almost.
Anything else?
Like Reawakening is really good. Pick it and rest people. Like that's good. You're good. Yeah. Okay. Now we have that PSA. So
Oh god. Um, right. So we discussed Battle of Dazar'alor bosses. We've discussed traits. Good old switch hitter. Um, Untamed Ferocity. All that fun stuff. Oh, Ancient Bulwark. You noticed something quite cool about that. You had to play around with that, didn't you?
uh
That's the moving trait.
oh yeah. So
That's probably worth a mention. Obviously, it's a
yeah,
lions
this
only.
is one. Yeah, I don't know if there's an equivalent on Horde side, but there is this trait from Darkshire. I'm not sure if this is world boss or from the actual but it's like a 385 shoulder that has this unique trait which give you like 300 versatility. it's like 3% verse.
So obviously the way it says is it standing still grants you deep roots, increasing your versatility by X amount. Moving instead grants you uprooted, healing you for X amount every second.
Yeah, it's around 3% damage whenever you stand still.
Yeah.
Well, as it turns out, it flips instantly when you stand still, which makes it very easy to cast every single like ability, especially like bite and stuff that's impactful, with it up. Like even if you're moving, you can stand still just for the second, make sure you get the buff, and then just cast bite. Like, uh, which makes this actually a surprisingly good trait because most of these with these like unique drawbacks type stuff are bad, but this one's actually really good. So if you get that one,
Just
it's
one
not
to keep
actually
an
bad.
eye out on.
Yeah, it's really quite good.
Yeah, it's on the. Yeah, it does look like Ivus drops one.
The heal isn't useless either. It's like a hasted 1 second.
Oh, is it hasted?
Yeah, so it's like
Wow.
0.9 or 0.8 or something impact, which is pretty good. It's like a 0.5% of your
It's
health
probably
or
not going
something.
to save you, but you're probably not going to hate it either.
No, it's perfectly reasonable. It's not great. It's fine. So yeah, I like that trait actually. It's much better than this. But yeah, just a side note. Like obviously
Yeah.
this is like on one
Yeah.
piece.
So it's not
So,
enormously relevant, but who
no.
knows? Um, cool. Right, traits, Battle of Dazar'alor. Oh, we want to talk about 8.1 and sort of thoughts on how it went. So obviously we've talked about Primal Wrath and we've talked about that row to a degree. It's nice to be able to take Brutal Slash. Primal Wrath is insanely strong.
Oh
The
yeah, and
controversial. Oh, go on.
Ruslash really feels pretty good on single target. Like
Yeah,
we already suspected it would, but it really like it really does fill the role that Trash used to have on the rotation. Where there's a little bit to think about. It's not like a
in
massive
terms of
deal, but
charges, and it's yeah.
yeah, min-maxing it is pretty fun, to be honest. Fun gameplay, small thing.
Obviously, it's not hugely impactful, but it's nice to just have that little play around with that.
Mm.
Yeah. So fan of Brutal Slash, Primal Wrath. We've obviously mentioned the other trait talent on that row, Scent of Blood. That doesn't seem to have found a place.
No, and it's not surprising either.
Yeah.
It's not even a bad talent in theory. It's just not very usable especially when you compare to Primal.
Yeah, especially when you consider the fact that Brutal Slash has single target value, and Primal Wrath is just insanely fucking strong. It kind of just sits in a bit of a no man's land.
Yeah, like it's a solid one. The issue so it is really good at generating combo points efficiently and like AoE. It allows you to rip basically a lot of targets. So you'd say, oh well, this sounds very similar to just using Primal Rub, and that is true. The issue is obviously it doesn't apply it very quickly, so it has a lot more ramp, and it requires a lot more effort because you need to tab around to target everything to do rip, etc. Like the combination of this just makes it very not very usable at all. And even if it would in theory perlate perfectly be close, which it probably won't because Ferocious Bite hits way, 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 way harder than not necessarily than it should, but then Rip does, makes it not great, unfortunately. You can use it to funnel damage, like you can. It's the DPS gain, but that situation also not it's not very impact compared to just using Brutus Slash. Like on
Yeah.
something like Soul, it's questionable value. Certainly overall it's probably worse, but overall damage on Soul is kind of relevant as well. But it's very questionable if all the effort you put in to min-max this
And you don't.
for
Yeah.
a very minor DPS increase
Yeah.
makes it pretty unfortunate.
So that hasn't kind of landed very well for all those reasons. Obviously, we got the Soul of the Forest incarnation Savage Roro, where for the most part you're just going to end up taking Soul of the Forest.
It's unfortunate. Like the difference here is basically it's like a 5% difference between the other talents, both of slightly less for incarnation with some optimization.
Which sounds quite a lot until we get onto what we're going to talk about next. But
Yeah, like 5% is a lot. This is patchwork numbers. It's
yeah.
less in, but the thing is
So obviously we
that's
can see use for incarnation potentially. We've mentioned
yeah.
that already. Potential burst fights. Savage Roar is kind of the same thing as Soul of the Forest, so it's kind of at the mercy of tuning.
Yeah,
Um,
the big issue has to do with finishers versus builders for both. Like incarnation buffs rake, that's the big deal, but also shred, and obviously and all the shred rates and stuff. And this is why it was good in last patch, because you could stack so many shred increases that essentially it became good just because you have stacked so many multipliers. And stacking multipliers is basically always a good idea if you
hello, Arcane
can.
Mages.
Yeah, exactly. Or sub rogues or whatever. Like there's been plenty of specs that have managed to stack an obscene amount of multipliers and became overpowered as a result. But what has happened now, obviously, is with the changes, nerfs, etc., and the fact of the matter that finish is just massive part of damage, like bites a massive part of damage and stuff. That means it's just so hard for a talent like Solo or Savage, because Soul of the Forest, essentially all of it is finisher. It gives you energy, yes, every time you use a finisher, so it encourages you to use more finishers, and it also buffs the raw finisher damage. Like if you add that together, you realize it is just it syncs up so well with the type of playstyle we're already, and that's why it's good now. And
Yeah,
like yeah, it would probably be easy to fix this because it's essentially just a tuning thing
yeah,
anyway.
that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. But obviously, there is one row which is a little bit out of line. Just a
Yeah,
little bit. I'm sure everyone knows what we're talking about here. This is the Predator Sabretooth Li row. So obviously
yeah,
that row traditionally before Sabretooth had a reasonable amount of flex in it. Post Sabretooth, there is no flex in it. um, obviously Sabretooth is a fucking shit ton of damage. What were you saying earlier? It's about 10%.
it's worse. It's almost 20% if you raw like percent of your damage breakdown. If you have no talent, then compared to Sabretooth, it's between 15 and 20. So it's an now obviously Li and the Predator also adds a reasonable amount of that, but they add maybe 5% each. Like Li maybe 9%, and that is a strong talent in general. But the Sabretooth just adds almost twice of what a strong talent adds. So it
And
is
yeah,
extremely overpowered. Like
that's taken us from like a reasonably balanced row where we could take Predator on fights, we could take other stuff, to just a fucking obscenely broken row in favor of Sabretooth. Um,
yeah, like it's like theoretically in the perfect scenario where you have waves dying all the time and you're AoEing super heavily, Predator might be better. That's the kind of thing. Like in practice, it's never gonna be better. It's like best case, oh, Predator is like 0.5% better or 1% better than Sabretooth. And the worst case, like, oh yeah, Sabretooth is like 10%.
yeah,
So it's almost never a good idea to actually pick Predator because even if it would be better, the gain is very small. Whereas the loss, from not having Sabretooth when you're like Patchwork or something is enormous.
yeah. I mean that's basically what it comes down to. Um, so we
Yeah,
mentioned,
like this is unfortunate.
yeah, there's nothing else you can really say about it. Unfortunate, yeah.
And the worst part about it is it's not so it has, for example, 20% bite damage on it.
It's got a tuning knob on it. It's just not
It's not
being
even
used.
remotely powerful enough. So even if you delete this tuning knob, so basically when we had the execute, this was useless below 25% compared to
Yep.
vanilla because you in vanilla without talent you would still get the same effect at 25%. That was removed. Like I don't think removing that was a bad idea actually. I know some people do, but I honestly don't care. The execute was kind of weak, but the issue is now suddenly Sabretooth gets that execute and what it used to do. And bite is a larger percentage of the damage and scale with mastery. So like the combination of these effects just has made it that, the base effect that we've had forever, and it has basically never been overpowered. Very, very, very overpowered. And there's essentially no way of tuning this without like completely destroying. Uh,
Please just destroy the talent, make it gone.
yeah, or like like it desperately needs some kind of rework. Or I mean, it's possible to balance around, but you would basically have to buff Predator and Li by a very large amount.
And at that point, that talent row just gets obscenely broken. Like it's not
And yeah,
particularly healthy to have rows which are like 15-20% of your damage across the board.
now, don't get me wrong, like that could happen. Like we could see a world which the patch notes or hotfix or whatever says like, oh, Li damage increased by 80%. Or like I'm not memeing. Like this is literally the scope of the numbers. Like it's around this type of obscenely large buff.
Yeah.
Um,
It'd be hard to buff Predator in that way.
yeah, but you probably can. but yeah, so the problem is, this might happen. Like, it's not out of the question that this might happen because that's the way you would balance. But yeah, it's very unfortunate, the situation, at least. Um, we could talk a lot about why Sabretooth isn't a good talent. I know some people
we
actually like it, but yeah.
we have talked somewhat about it. I did joke that we'd do a whole episode on Sabretooth, um, but we decided not to. Um,
Mm. Although I
I
will warn
really fucking
everyone,
hate Sabretooth.
if we run out of things to talk about, trust me, that thing might say.
Yeah, just keep that in the back pocket for now. Wait for that one.
It's worth saying though, I guess, because everyone may not be aware of this. Sabretooth actually is pretty cool for our opener and like target swapping
Oh yeah,
specifically.
for the opener, it's actually pretty interesting. The whole one combo point opener, and that sort of lets us make use of the 8.1 change, which we really liked. The combo point independency on Rip. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it feels good to play.
yeah,
Honestly, it's
so that was nice for Sabretooth, but I
that's where
think
it
there's
begins.
better ways you could have done that anyway,
Yeah,
um, without just degenerating the entire rotation, which is kind of what has ended up happening.
yeah,
Um,
it's such a shame that you literally cannot like picking anything else here is a
is trolling,
yeah,
basically. Um, it's just insane. And I mentioned before we did this that I might put you on the spot a little bit, and we can talk about how we would change those rows. So I know you had like a tuning package theorized that you'd worked on.
yeah.
So what was that? That was it was a significant LI buff, wasn't it? It was removing the damage from Ferocious Bite.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry, go on.
buffing the baseline. So basically, I moved the damage increase to 20 from Sabretooth to Ferocious Bite to
Yeah,
just be baseline.
which seems pretty
And
ideal.
yeah, because that means the overall damage doesn't change, and it also means all the other talents like Predator, for example, gets indirectly buffed, right? Since it
Yep.
also gets that benefit. So that's a way to kind of balance it. But it's still not an optimal solution, right? Like I said, it means you get this obscenely powerful row where
Yeah, where
and
Sabretooth
and
is
it
still
probably
strong.
just makes yeah, it probably just makes Eli the best talent in almost all situations. Like so it basically just flips them because you essentially yeah, it is problematic. It's very problematic. I think ultimately this has to change. Not because I dislike biting, and not even because I want necessarily the spec to be harder. Like that's not like I think there's an argument for that, but it is a very separate argument from why I
Yeah,
don't like Sabretooth. I don't think the spec needs to be hard. That's not the point. But the issue with Sabretooth is it makes it so you only have one finish. There's no gameplay there. There's no decision. There's nothing. Right? There's
yeah.
nothing to track barely.
I talked a lot about this on the beta when like yeah, it
And
just removes so much of your rotation, and the thought behind your rotation is far more than just removing the rip. Um, it removes so much thought out of your rotation other than just rip not being a button you press anymore.
so like I can understand the argument for why you would want like, oh, I want to bite more, I don't want to think so much about rip, I don't think dot management. Like I get that. Like maybe there is a compromise here that's reasonable, but I think you rather would start over and say, okay, how can we make a more bite focused rotation.
Yeah,
It's supposed to be an easy talent, but without this specific effect, because it is unfortunately going to be very problematic to balance this
yeah. Like I do
essentially.
think it would be semi-interesting with Sabretooth if you cut the CD, or not the CD, the
The
added duration
extension.
on rip,
Yeah.
so that you will drop rip eventually. Because that does add some like it keeps a moderate of the gameplay, but also adds some semi-interesting gameplay in terms of balancing when you're going to rip instead of the bite, and can I fit another bite in without dropping rip here?
Yeah.
And there's some interesting stuff to be had there. But
Yeah, no, I agree, and like I
yeah,
think that's a possible solution, right? So you could make it so I don't know. I'm just taking these numbers out of my ass, but something like 1 second per combo point, or 1.5, or along those lines.
yeah,
And that's a tuning way, right? So it's possible to tune it like that, and I think maybe that will happen. Maybe that's a good change, but it will obviously change how the talent plays quite
oh
dramatically.
yeah, significantly. It would be quite. I'm trying
You
to
could
think of the right
also
word here. Quite significant change in pace.
yeah, and you could also imagine like there are other avenues as well. There's a few different ways you could address this balance issue and make a better, more fun talent. Because like my point here isn't that I want a hard alternative talent. Like I want Ally to be viable, because that is the difficulty kind of I think is good, right? And so if Ally is a good talent, like that is enough for me. I don't care about Sabretooth existing, right? I don't even care about it being like viable, right? Really, like if it's even with Ally, that's perfectly fine with that. But I just don't want it to be this dominant, because I really don't like it. And if you try playing it with like you have Primal Ra, for example, so you don't even have Brutus Lad,
Yeah,
it becomes the single target
there's a
becomes
lot
of
out of your
very, and especially say you have Mock, Solo the Forest, and Saber,
You've got functionally
and
two buttons. You
and
got
you're on a
Rake,
pure single
Shreds, and
target
Ferocious Bite.
and plus bot. Yeah, exactly. And you press your rake like once every 15 seconds, and you don't care about the snapshot either. Like this rotation is
Yeah,
very
like
fruitless. Like it
it's not
looks
good
complicated,
gameplay.
but it's not. Yeah,
I don't think it even looks significantly complicated.
not if you know Pharah, but
Yeah,
you look at
okay,
this like,
fair
oh,
enough.
there's all these interactions, and oh, you can snapshot on Tiger and stuff.
But none
But
of the
like
interactions are actually becoming into play.
yeah, exactly. In practice, you don't care about any of this. So yeah, it's unfortunate, I think.
Yeah, well, that is a teaser for the potential future episode on Fuck Sabretooth. um, and yeah, that's about it. Obviously, Battle for Dazar'alor releases next week, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, I think that will
Oh,
be. Oh,
just a short thing on the battle as well. Like there is actually 3 raid trinkets.
oh yeah, we should actually mention trinkets.
Mm.
That's a good point. So there's the Kimball's Claw, which is an on-use damage. That's the one that deals increase. No, that's the Yulon one, isn't it?
The Yulon one is unused.
Yeah. Okay, so Kimball's is just the proc one.
It's a proc dot. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And then we've got the crit trinket, which looks complicated, but actually isn't that complicated.
That's just so it has a very long name that I don't remember, but it shortens to Vigor. So let's just call it Vigor for now.
Vigor works
Like
for me.
that's the name of the trinket. Yeah.
And that is it's the stacking crit. Here we go. I've got it up. Variable intensity gigavolt oscillating reactor Vigor.
Yeah.
So it's your critical strike increases by X every 2 seconds, capping at 600 crit for 6 seconds, then decreasing and turning off for 6 seconds. So it cycles every 32 seconds.
Yeah, and
And
this
then it
is
has.
random when you enter combat as well. Like it starts
Oh,
to
is it?
run cycle. So
Oh,
you
that's
cannot
interesting.
actually play around that really. It just is its own.
And the
The
on
thing
use
with it,
is
yeah,
maintain the current value for 6 seconds on a 1 minute 30 cooldown. So obviously the obvious gameplay here is going to be to use it at max stacks.
yeah, exactly. You want to track this trinket, and when you are at max stacks, you want to use the. It is not super complicated, but it's a small mini game. I guess it's the best trinket from there, by the way. Like you probably want this one.
Yeah.
The other two are suspect, so
Yeah,
they
so it's
might be
Kimball's,
fine.
your damaging attacks with a
Looks
chance to
in,
claw your target.
yeah, yeah, you can read them, sure.
And then clawing the target from behind will leech damage, and then Invocation of Yulon, which is just commanded invocation to strike your target, dealing X nature damage split among all nearby enemies. This is the weird one because it deals increased damage when striking multiple targets, despite being a single target Brock.
Yeah, it splits. So basically, it splits damage with targets, but it does more damage. It's a really weird concept. But yeah, it's okay on AoE and it's okay on second. The thing is though, both of these trinkets, the damage ones, are somewhat suspect tuning wise. Like this could be changed, I don't know, but raid trinkets, as we all know, have a tendency to be quite bad, unfortunately.
Which kind of sucks, but that is life.
Yeah, it has been that way now since start of Legion and such, with exceptions, but generally speaking, raid trinkets have been disappointing. So I would say the crit trinket is likely gonna be one of the good trinkets you want.
Then you'll probably want an M plus trinket in the second
Yeah,
slot or something.
I think the like the Kimbos or whatever is probably fine, but yeah, certainly I don't think it's amazing. Like you need to look at Sims for this for you, obviously, and Blizzard has a tendency of retuning stuff like
Yeah,
last
we'll see
minute when
after
it comes to
Heroic
trink.
Week.
Yeah, but assuming nothing changes, you should probably keep your M plus trinkets just live. The spyglass, or haste is going to be good again, or well, much better anyway than it is on live for most people. So like the Gale Collars, for example, is probably going to be good, etc. Right? Like those kinds of
Yep.
the good and plus trinkets that were good is going to
Gale
be.
Callers, Spyglass, all that fun shit.
Yeah, the die as well, and those are it.
Azerox.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure everyone knows the semi-decent and plus trinkets now. But yeah, that's about it. More crit. We do like crit. Jungle Fury, Vigor, Spyglass.
Like all the
All the crit. Right. Okay then. Well, we will aim to do the next one, well, within a month. As opposed to our
hopefully
2 month
shorter.
hiatus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Obviously Christmas and various other stuff got in the way. But yeah, so we can probably look back then at Battle of Dazar'alor and how various bosses went out. Maybe we can talk about
How
better ways to do
reaping
each
works.
boss and how
That's good.
reaping works. Yeah, that'll be exciting. I think that's a really good fix for us actually.
Yeah,
We like AoE.
it was great.
Ook ook, give AoE. Me DH. But right, that will be us for this week, and we will this month, and we will see you next month. Bye.